Well, welcome back. We're in chapter 3 of Philippians. We're going into a new section here. So, first two chapters, Paul was talking about one of the killers of joy, which is ambition. I think is the big picture I'd put on that. Now he's talking about two more joy killers: legalism and lawlessness. Legalism and licentiousness. So Paul is going to open. I love the way he opens chapter 3 today. He says, "Rejoice. Finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord." Or therefore, finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. Yeah, it's a great opening. What a great way to start your day with someone telling you to rejoice. That's what Paul talks about here. And he's reminding them, this is an important verse, I think, to let us know that we need to be reminded to pursue joy. We need to be reminded to embrace joy, to strive for joy throughout the day. It's not something that in a fallen world and fallen people, we not necessarily joyful by nature. So it's something that we pursue. Then he gives us a warning here. Look out. And look at the strong language he uses. Look out for dogs, for evildoers, the mutilators of the flesh. Paul would probably not fit into the typical church today. He is so blunt and so outspoken. I'm sure he would be off-putting for a lot of people. What he's talking about here is a group of people who are in the church, really plaguing the church from what we can tell, advocating the adoption of aspects of the Mosaic law in addition to following Jesus. In other words, Jesus himself is not enough. We have to add the law on top of it. But Paul denies that. He says there is a true and a false circumcision. Well, you recall circumcision was basically an operation that was performed on Jewish men from Genesis chapter 15 on. That marks them out as members of the Abrahamic covenant. We'll go into all the details about why that particular procedure and what does it mean, how does the meaning change. But when we come to the New Testament, we find that the true circumcision is not in the flesh, but it's the circumcision that Christ has made, a circumcision of our hearts. If the physical circumcision set people apart to the Abrahamic covenant, then the spiritual circumcision that Christ performs sets us apart to him. Paul is saying that now that what the law anticipated is here, the law is of no use for us anymore. That's what Paul is saying here. And in verses 4 through 6, he catalogs his past achievements, which are impressive. He has some impressive past achievements. But then in verse 7, he says, but whatever gain I had, I counted as a loss for the sake of Christ. So this change has been made. Before Christ came was the law. After the Christ, specifically after the cross, the law has lost any of its ability. Now it's only Christ. Christ has changed how God deals with the world. It's no longer through the law, but it's through him, through Jesus. So no longer do we comply with the law. No longer does the law reveal our sin and shame and guilt. Jesus takes that away. Jesus relieves us from it. So in verses 4 through 6, Paul talks about his achievements. In 7 to 8, he talks about the futility of those worldly achievements in comparison, verses 9 to 11, to the surpassing worth of knowing Christ. At one point, knowing the laws and the details about the laws and the sacrifices and all the do's and don'ts had worth, but in light of Christ's coming, they are worthless. Paul tosses them aside as worthless and says the supreme worth is knowing Christ. The righteousness that comes through faith, the power of his resurrection. Paul has the desire to be like him, and that's what he urges for us. I love verse 13. It says, brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own, that is his perfection in Christ. But one thing I do, forgetting what lies ahead and forgetting what lies behind and straining ahead or forward to what lies ahead. So Paul has left his own old life behind, and he's pursuing this life of Christ-likeness. We talked about humility last time. Paul's pursuing that. He's pursuing being like Christ. You know, brothers and sisters, all of us have a past. We come to the cross with a burden of sin, sins of things we should have done and didn't, and things we shouldn't have done and did. Things that would make us embarrassed, would make us ashamed. When we bring them up in our minds, we go back to those days of shame and embarrassment. But Paul doesn't go back to those days, and neither should you. You shouldn't let your mind wander back to the evil days before the cross, but rather focus your mind on pressing on. Don't let those thoughts of what you used to be and what you used to do and what you should have done and didn't do burden you anymore. Instead, set your mind on Christ and press forward to be more and more like Him. It's an important quality, an important act. Paul says in verse 15, let those of us who are mature think this way. This is a sign of maturity, to let all that old stuff go, to take that baggage off your back, let it by the side of the road, and press on into Christian life. This is a mature attitude. I pray that you are mature, that you have this attitude. And if you don't have that attitude, if any of you think otherwise, God will reveal that also to you. So pray for the Lord to reveal that. Pray for the Lord to develop that maturity in you that He wants to see in the followers of Christ. Verse 17 then, Paul shifts from talking about legalism to lawlessness. And lawlessness is never separated from people. In order to be lawless, we have to have people involved. It seems simple, but don't lose sight of that as we go through these verses. He's talking about lawlessness as a concept and lawless people who bring that teaching. Paul begins first by saying that these lawless ones, that they need to keep their eyes open, disregard his teaching, the apostolic teaching, and the lifestyle that the Bible advocates. Again, this is not legalism, but it's obedience to what the Word says. Paul says they disregard both. They disregard what the Word says and what the lifestyle is that should result from that. He summarizes them by calling them enemies of the cross. That is, they're against everything that Jesus has accomplished at the cross. All the redemption, all the reconciliation, the propitiation that He's exercised there, or developed, or enabled there, all these things they are against them. He characterizes them as people who are driven by their appetites. Their belly is their God. I don't think he's talking about just food here, but he certainly has gluttony in mind. But anything that causes pleasure, anything that satisfies their lust, anything that satisfies their envy against others, these are the things that drive them. These are the things that pushes them and motivates them. They're shameful, Paul says, and they are earthly minded. That's how we identify these people. Look at their motive. Look where their mind is at. You can see it because what they say and how they live. It's how we can tell a false teacher, not only by what they say, but how they live. And then Paul closes the chapter reminding us of the very, very different hope and expectation that we have in Christ. So how do we apply this, brothers and sisters? Well, let me suggest two things. One is that we need to run after Christ. We need to pursue Him, pursue Christ-likeness, pursue being like Jesus by being in His Word, coming to His Word with a heart ready to obey, and putting His Word into practice in our lives. Pursue Christ. Well, if we're going to run to Christ, The second application is to run away from these lawless ones. Paul says, look out for them. Keep your eyes on those who walk according to the example you have in us, not on those other people. Don't look to them. Flee them. Run away. Be discerning and stay away from them. Don't even get close, because they'll lead you into lawlessness. And both legalism and lawlessness will rob you of joy. So brothers and sisters, put this to work today. Don't let legalism or lawlessness or lawless people rob you of the joy that's yours in Christ. Instead, pursue Him, imitate Him, and I think your joy will grow and grow. God bless you, brothers and sisters. Hope you're having a great week, and we'll see you tomorrow in Philippians chapter 4.